Hello everyone. Welcome to the Yissilmissil Productions channel. My name is Steven Yissel. Today we're continuing our deep dive into the Bermuda Triangle. This is part 10 and we are on chapter 8. Something I did for all of you earlier in the week here, I collected a bunch of photographs that were taken of the Illuminaut, which was the submersible that went and looked around the seabed in the areas that we're discussing here. So I put those together for you guys to see as a slideshow while I speak here. And the credit goes to Kelly Michaels, and I believe it was on Pinterest. So I just did a general search for the Illuminaut, and there's a bunch of photographs here. So you get to see the interior, you get to see the exterior, you get to see it in color, which I think is great. But yeah, enjoy these photographs while we begin our reading for today. There's 52 photographs here. That's in the slideshow, but you'll get to see all of them here while we talk. It's just going to loop. So today we are on chapter 8. The surprises of prehistory. Hey Zen, good to see you. Yeah, we'll be getting this started shortly. So, yeah, I hope you all have had a good week so far. And Tuesday was our latest Coral Castle deep dive. So if you haven't seen that yet, please go check that out. And just a reminder that Saturday morning is the Chicago Film Industry Deep Dive Series, which I have planned through the end of June. And after that, I will be taking a 2-week break or so. The first 2 weeks of July, I want to just take a break, because this is a lot of work doing all this. But anyways, we have quite a lengthy chapter here. About 40 pages. I'm guessing I could split this into 3 segments. I'm hoping I'll be able to do it in 3. But I'm having a feeling we might go to stretch this chapter out to 4 parts. But we'll see how it goes. So, chapter 8, The Surprises of Prehistory. Several investigators of the Bermuda Triangle mystery have suggested that alien intelligences may be interested or even concerned in the possibility that our development of nuclear fission for warfare may be threatening the existence of civilization on our planet, as it may have previously destroyed other civilizations on this and other planets. The time span of rational man on this planet, of an intelligence potential comparable to that of today, may extend back 40,000 to 50,000 years in time, or even farther. Therefore, if we give a civilization such as the present one a period of about 10,000 years to progress to a point in science and technology where it attains the potential of effecting its own destruction, we still have an ample time slot for the presence of one or more world cultures antedating our own. Perhaps any advanced technical civilization would eventually, by chance or design, develop the power inherent in nuclear fission. It took our own civilization considerably less than 10,000 years. Well, if they did it already, I don't think the 10,000 years part's correct. Like, we're talking mere thousands of years from what Archaics has researched and a few of these other channels that I do follow on architecture and ancient civilizations. We've covered a lot here already with sunken cities. that are being found by this thing it was able to crawl along a road that was on the bottom of the ocean. So there's ample evidence of civilizations that have fallen. And why are they underwater? We still don't know. It's not climate change, I'll tell you that much. So, continuing on, I'm going to reread a certain part of this just so there's continuity. Perhaps any advanced technical civilization would eventually, by chance or design, develop the power inherent in nuclear fission, at which point the civilization would have to decide on a means of controlling its development or risk its own ruin. If such a world culture had existed, caused its own destruction, and disappeared, its memory would perhaps be preserved in legends, or suggested by certain anachronistic artifacts of uncertain age, or recalled by huge ruins impossible to identify or explain. And these are the very elements that tend to locate the site of such a culture in the area now covered by the waters of the Bermuda Triangle. There you go. Edgar Cayce, in his dictated readings on Atlantis, repeatedly made what seems to be references to nuclear power sources, lasers and masers, comparable with our own, and generally employed for the same uses that we enjoy, if that is the right word, today. His descriptions of their applications, of his observation of the danger of their misuses, would be considered today fairly standardized reporting of facts and editorial comment. But how did Cayce know all this more than 35 years ago? Cayce described these power sources in some detail. They were great generators, producing power to propel air and underwater craft. They were capable of producing illumination, heating, and communication. They powered forms of radio, television, and were used in long-distance photography. They also supplied the power which served for the modification and rejuvenation of living tissues, including the brain. And in this connection, we also used to control, misread there. They also supplied the power which served for the modification and rejuvenation of living tissues, including the brain, and in this connection were also used to control and discipline entire social classes. However, through the misuse of the natural forces they had developed and through civil and external strife, the Atlanteans eventually unleashed uncontrollable forces of nature which caused their own destruction, a belief generally shared in common by Cayce and the legends of many older cultures of the world. Hey Jason, I see you there. Good to have you here. In Cayce's words, quote, man brought in the destructive forces that combined with those natural resources of the gases of forces made in nature and natural form, the worst of the eruptions that awoke from the depth of the slowly cooling earth and that portion of Atlantis now near what would be termed the Sargasso Sea first went into the ocean. End quote. In his relation of prehistory, Cayce seems to have specifically predicted the use of lasers and masers, who recognized existence at that moment in 1942 still lay some years ahead in the future. He described a gigantic crystal power source, quote, in which the light appeared as a means of communication between infinity and the finite, or the means whereby were the communications with the forces from the outside. Later, this came to mean that from which the energies radiated as of the center from which there were the radial activities guiding the various forms of transition and travel through those periods of activity of the Atlanteans. It was set as a crystal, though in quite a different form from that first used there. Do not confuse these two, for there were many generations of difference. It was in those periods when there was the directing of aeroplanes, or means of travel, though they at the time would travel in the air, or on the water, or under the water, just the same. Yet the force from which these were directed was in the central power station, or Tuwai stone, which was, and the beam on which it acted. So Tuwai stone is spelled Tuaoi. And that's the end of that quote. In another reading, he referred to a location in Poseidia. In other words, the Bahamas area, then above water, as the site of, quote, the storage of the motivative forces of nature from the great crystals that so condensed the lights, the forms, the activities, as to guide not only the ships on the sea but in the air, and many of those now known conveniences for man, as in the transmission of the body and in the transmission of the voice, as in the recording of those activities in what is soon to become a practical thing, in so creating the vibrations as to make for television, as it is termed in the present. The present in this case refers to 1935. And that was an end quote, with the parentheses being the present in this case refers to 1935. So he was talking about television in the 1930s. A 1932 reading contains an interesting reference to transportation of heavy weights and materials. Quote, through the use of those recently rediscovered gases and those of the electrical and areatic formations in the breaking up of the atomic forces to produce impelling force to those means and modes of transportation or of travel, or of lifting large weights, or of changing the forces of nature itself. End quote. The fact that the supposedly primitive peoples of prehistory have left enormous stones still in place after thousands of years, upon many of which subsequent races have built new constructions, has long been an archaeological mystery, since the stones set by unknown preceding races are so much larger and more difficult to transport than those put in place by subsequent cultures that their presence and mode of transportation are unexplainable. And I was just about to say that. You have these ancient megalithic sites that have these extremely large stones at the base, and then as you get further higher on like these walls or buildings, whatever they have there, there's like different layers where you can tell where different civilizations added their own stonework to these structures. So you have smaller stones as it goes up higher and higher, and that's really due to the loss of the technology of moving the larger stones. And this plays right into everything with Homestead, Florida, and Edley Skolnick and his Coral Castle. That man apparently did all of that stuff on his own, and he said that he knew the secrets of the pyramids. So that's a pretty large claim to make, especially since he did not leave any hints or secrets behind on how he did it, and we're just left here to speculate. He did make a bunch of pamphlets that we've read over here on this channel on the Coral Castle Deep Dive series, but really, that's just one case, but that's a special case, Coral Castle. But we also have Easter Island with all of the giant head statues that are now, as we know, they're buried, and Machu Picchu, Pumapunku, all of these cities that are being dug up, and I know some of them are also, like, they've had the archaeology stop in some places. So you have to wonder what they're trying to cover up there. Hey Jay, I see you in the chat. Good to see you. So just a little refresher here. The slideshow that's being shown is of the Illuminaut, which was a submersible that was basically able to glide along roads that were on the bottom of the ocean around the Bermuda Triangle area. So, all right, let's continue here. But I thought that was very important to point out here with these megalithic structures. Examples include a 200-ton porphyry blocks of Ollantaytambo and Ollantayparubo, Peru, transported great distances over mountains and ravines, and then placed on the tops of other cliffs 1,500 feet high. The enormous blocks of Saskatchewan, Peru, so large and intricately faced flush one to the other that the Incas attributed their construction to the gods. So these, like, you can't even fit a piece of paper in between these rock formations, and some of them look like they were molded originally like they were clay, and then they hardened into stone. So we don't really know how that was all developed and built. The 100-ton foundation blocks of Tiahuanaco, Bolivia, on which enormous buildings were somehow constructed, although the altitude is 2.5 miles above sea level. Other examples include the great stones of the Calendar or Observatory at Stonehenge, England, the massive blocks of the Bimini Undersea Wall, Foundation or Sea Bastion, or the standing stones of prehistoric Brittany, one of which weighed over 340 tons and stood 65 feet high, and the great stones of the foundation of the Temple of Jupiter at Baalbek, Syria. You see, now, I'm going to stop here for a moment. I'm under the impression that the United States government went into Afghanistan to recover some of these ancient technologies. I really think that's what was going on 20 years ago. The great stones at Baalbek, Syria, placed there long before the classical temple was built, one of which weighs 2,000 tons. As almost all of these constructions are extremely difficult to explain in terms of our assessment of the engineering skills of the cultures that we think erected them, it has been suggested that a superior civilization was responsible for their construction. Yeah, no crap. This is supported by the fact that many of these inexplicable ruins closely resemble each other. And that's another fine point to make here. A lot of these places, they have similar construction. And, I mean, even here in the United States, we have plenty of pyramids. In Illinois here, there's pyramids. We have like a little Egypt, Illinois. And I live in a town called Niles. So figure that one out. And there's also 3 others. I think there's Niles, Ohio, Niles, Michigan. But it's all in the Midwest area here. And there's theories about what the Grand Canyon used to be. There's real wild explanations for that as well, saying that the Middle East is actually here in the United States. Like, ancient Middle East is where the United States is today. As almost all of these constructions are extremely difficult to explain in terms of our assessment and engineering skills of the cultures that we think erected them, it has been suggested that a superior civilization was responsible for their construction. This is supported by the fact that many of these inexplicable ruins closely resemble each other. Casey specifically singled out Bimini as one of the several points where information concerning the alleged power sources of Atlantis was to be found. Quote, in the sunken position of Atlantis or Poseidia, where a portion of the temples may be discovered under the slime of ages of seawater, near what is known as Bimini off the coast of Florida. End quote. A detailed description of one of these power sources or nuclear plants, question mark, it says here, was transcribed in 1935. Casey's son, Edgar Evans Casey, a practicing engineer and also an author, Edgar Casey on Atlantis, Warner Library, 1968, has observed in commenting on the paradox of Casey's accounts of prehistory having predated by some decades our own scientific developments. Quote, a layman of today could scarcely describe our latest scientific developments more clearly. End quote. Casey's account, recorded in 1933, deals with a building where the Firestone or crystal complex was kept and from which its power was diffused. And this is going to be a big quote here. Quote, in the center of a building which today would be said to be lined with non-conductive stone, something akin to asbestos, with other non-conductors, such as are now being manufactured in England under a name which is well known to many of those who deal in such things. The building above the stone was oval, or a dome, wherein there could be a portion for rolling back, so that the activity of the stars, the concentration of energies that emanate from bodies that are on fire themselves, along with elements that are found and not found in Earth's atmosphere. The concentration through the prisms of glass, as would be called in the present, was in such a manner that it acted upon the instruments which were connected with the various modes of travel through induction methods, which made much the same character of control as would in the present day be termed remote control through radio vibrations or directions. Through the kind of force impelled from the stone acted upon the motivating forces in the crafts themselves. The building was constructed so that when the dome was rolled back, there might be little to no hindrance in the direct application of power to various crafts that were to be impelled through space, whether within the radius of vision or whether directed underwater or under other elements or through other elements. The preparation of this stone was solely in the hands of the initiates at the time, and the entity was among those who directed the influences of the radiation which arose, in the form of rays that were invisible to the eye but acted upon the stones themselves as set in the motivating forces. Whether the aircraft were lifted by the gases of the period, or whether for guiding the more of pleasure vehicles that may pass along closer to the earth, or crafts on the water or under the water. These then were impelled by the concentration of rays from the stones, which were centered in the middle of the power station or powerhouse, as would be the term in the present. End quote. Casey consistently returns to the misuse of the tremendous forces developed by the super civilization. Quote, the raising of the powers from the sun itself to the ray that makes for the disintegration of the atom brought about the destruction of that portion of the land. End quote. If and always if such a cataclysm or series of cataclysms occurred, the great power source would have been precipitated into the sea, along with the populous cities, walls, canals, and other constructions of Atlantis. It is interesting to consider that the very sites indicated by this theory are those where many of the electromagnetic aberrations in the Bermuda Triangle have taken place, such as the tongue of the ocean, Bimini, and other locations. While such power complexes could hardly be expected to function after thousands of years, it is nevertheless interesting in this connection to comment on the behavior of the mysterious white waters noted by observers from Columbus to the astronauts. The flumes of white water appear to originate at the same point or points of emanation, line up the same way, and then drift off for a mile or more. The lines are squiggly at the beginning and then become less definite, almost as if they indicated gases escaping under pressure. So this would almost look like carbonated water on the surface. And like they mentioned here, Christopher Columbus had accounts of it. Can't verify that, but that's what they're saying here. And then also the astronauts, which when they were, let's just say when they were up in orbit, they were up really high and they were able to see it too. All right. Compass deviations and electric malfunction might be caused by an enormous concentration of metal under the water. This has been observed in various parts of the world where known deposits of iron cause compasses to vary. Subsurface or substratum masses can possibly affect even the surface of the sea. In a 1970 NASA report of a cavity on the surface of the ocean above the Puerto Rico Trench, the surface depression was attributed by scientists to, quote, an unusual distribution of mass beneath the ocean floor, end quote, causing deflection of the pull of gravity. In the case of the Bermuda Triangle, it has been suggested that ruined sources of power still have conserved some of their strength and, triggered at certain times, might not only be responsible for magnetic and electric deviation, but also contribute electrical impulses for magnetic storms. This theory, one of the most unusual of those proposed to explain the Bermuda Triangle incidents, is predicated on Casey's readings and a belief in them. However, one may justifiably ask, is there any reason for the scientifically curious to credit any of Casey's recorded statements other than to admire them as the product of a vivid imagination? While it is true that some of the power sources he described 35 years ago were not yet discovered or even imagined in the real world, and some had not even yet been developed, it must be remembered that Casey was not a physicist, nor was he a historian. He was simply a clairvoyant healer with an excellent record. However, predictions that have nothing to do with healing, which he made in the course of his readings, have somehow proved uncomfortably exact, such as the atom bomb, the assassination of U.S. presidents, racial turmoil in the United States, and even mudslides in California. In addition, Casey's readings are purportedly based on visions or memories from his subjects' lives during their present incarnations, or during their past incarnations, a feature which frequently has ruled out credibility on the part of persons who, from religion, scientific conviction, or their own logic, do not accept the theory of reincarnation. One wonders if there might not be an alternate explanation which might account for such detailed and scientifically valid descriptions of past civilizations and their potentially dangerous developments. So they mentioned reincarnation here. I'm not ready to talk about that stuff yet because I don't know where I stand on that. Reincarnation's a real touchy subject, and it does tend to get a lot of people pushed away from certain things. So I'll talk about that later on, but I do believe that there is some form of that happening. I myself I've been called an old soul, so I have some instances where I believe that I've been here before, but as with all the rest of that, I can't really prove any of it. So it's all speculation and feeling and intuition, I guess. All right, let's continue. In the religious and philosophical records of ancient India, which often contain strangely modern concepts of matter and the universe, we find references to what is called, quote, cosmic consciousness, end quote, meaning the persistent presence of memories of everything that has happened before. I think you call that the Akashic records? Akashic records? Yeah, basically, it's a It's a concept that like everything that's ever happened has been recorded in time and space. So every thought that you've had, every choice that you've made, every action that you've taken, it's all recorded down in whatever that is. Because like, where would those records be stored? I mean, it's a concept that like we can't really grasp fully, but I would say like it's a giant tape depository. Just think of it like a bunch of videotapes that has everything recorded on it. It's easier for me to think of it that way. Today, the existence of telepathy, the influence and hidden persistence of memory, and the power of psychic emanations, far from being downgraded by modern scientific investigation, are being seriously studied, not only on Earth but also in space, both as phenomena and also as a means of communication. Experiments are being conducted by the leading space powers, the United States and the USSR, that suggest that science fiction may be undergoing a metamorphosis into a future science fact. And I do believe a lot of this science fiction work was predictive. I do think some of these science fiction writers had extra knowledge that they wanted to share with the world, and fictional books was the only way they could do it without being unalived, so to say. And George Lucas does come to mind, because there's now a discovered moon. I believe it's around Saturn. It looks just like the Death Star. It is possible to expect surprisingly new developments in this area, which up to now certain gifted individuals have had, almost without being conscious of it, the ability to pick up the thoughts of others in the present and perhaps their hidden memories of the past. The past in this case could refer to memories inherited in chromosomes from our ancestors. For just as we inherit physical attributes and tendencies from our parents and grandparents, we also inherit them to a lesser degree, perhaps, from our distant ancestors, and these memory chromosomes may be part of this legacy. There is ample room within the human brain, of which only an estimated 10% is used, for the storage of an inherited memory bank. That'd be really cool if that was true, that we do have all of our ancestors' memories stored in here on a, what would you call it? Like a solid state drive, but we're not accessing it at all times. This would tend to explain the presence of a person's incomplete memories, the poignant sense of having visited a place before where one knows one has not been in this lifetime, the frustrating certainty of having lived an extended period of time within a single dream, the recall by persons, sometimes but not always under hypnosis, of details of past lives, which have been verified as historically accurate when previously unknown information about the time period in question was discovered. The cases of sudden fluency in and subsequent forgetfulness by children of languages spoken by their ancestors, but whose use they could not possibly have acquired. So that right there, it's also another thing that's been heavily documented. These children that have been saying that they are other people. Like, there was one in particular that comes to mind that they said that they died in a plane crash, or they were a pilot, and they said their name, and the parents went and looked up the name, and they found out that it was a pilot who crashed, and there was really no way for the child to figure that out on their own. And after a certain age, these individuals just end up letting go of that past life and start living their present life. So they stop saying that they are that previous person, and they start saying they are this person that they're living now. So that has been documented. There's a bunch of videos about that. But like everything, use your discernment, because Not everything that's on the internet is true, but there is documented evidence of all of these different children who say that they are people from past lives now living in this present life. While consideration of these known factors are often attributed to the reincarnation of souls, a belief shared by Buddhism, Hinduism, and the religion which perhaps had the longest life in religious history, that of ancient Egypt, the suggestion of inherited memory offers a possible alternative, although it really approximates the same thing, somewhat modified if we consider that rather than the individual soul being that of some chance person in time, it is our own ancestors who are reincarnated in us, endowing us with our accumulated memories along with their other attributes, just as generations of computers can be programmed to install their total memory banks into succeeding new machines. It's an interesting concept. However, whether Edgar Cayce effectively communicated with the reincarnated souls or the reincarnated memories of the people he served, the effect was much the same, and the interest in Atlantis generated by his readings has given the whole subject a new impetus, constantly increasing as unexpected discoveries within the last decade or so have seemed to offer a remarkable substantiation of the Atlantean readings. Those who hold to the theory that there existed a highly developed world civilization before the first culture stirrings in Egypt and Sumeria have long been considered cultists, sensationalists, visionaries, or simply fools. This reaction from what we might call, quote, the establishment, end quote, of archaeological or prehistoric studies is understandable when we consider that the existence of a great civilization before the 3rd millennium BC would considerably upset the neat tables and progressive steps of history from its early beginnings in Egypt and Mesopotamia through the cultures of Greece and Rome, eventually culminating in our own super civilization of today. Passing acknowledgement is often accorded to other little-known ancient cultures as, for example, the prehistoric civilization of the Americas, India, Central Asia, and certain other areas which did not in any case affect our own, quote, direct line, end quote, of civilization. Although there exists an abundance of legends and records in all ancient cultures concerning the sudden annihilation of a great civilization before the flood, which had progressed so far as to challenge heaven, the gods, or God, these legends, however strangely similar among themselves, may simply represent an object lesson or interesting story spread throughout the world in ancient marketplaces and along caravan trails or shipping routes for thousands of years and subsequently preserved within the religious records of almost all the Earth's peoples. Legends of a universal flood, a tower that men tried to build to heaven, and whose workers were confounded by a divinely inspired confusion of languages, as well as other familiar stories, were found by the invading Spaniards already to exist in the Indian civilization of the Americas at the time of the first Spanish conquest. Throughout the world's legends preserved by indigenous populations still dwelling within the shadow of enormous ruins, whose construction could not have been engineered except by stone setting and transportation techniques of an extremely advanced technology, refer always to a godlike race which moved the huge stones many thousands of years before their own history began. There are even traces of what might have been an ancient trade language, possibly an ancestor of ancient Greek with Aramaic overtones, found in language areas so far removed from the Middle East that they seem to have been washed up on the most distant shores by the seas and oceans. These include words of an archaic Greek in Hawaiian and other Polynesian languages, in the Maya language of the Yucatan, in Nahuatl, and that's spelled Nahuatl, the language of the Aztecs, and the lost Guanche language of the Canary Islands. So it's Guanche, Guanche. I'm probably mispronouncing that too. Spoken by a mysterious white race. The Guanches, discovered and soon exterminated by Spanish expeditions in the 15th century, had preserved memories of a larger homeland with a superior culture that had sunk beneath the ocean. The ancient American languages also contained words of clearly Aramaic and Phoenician origin, as well as some analogous to those contained in the Sinitic and Polynesian languages from the other side of the Pacific, all indicative of long voyages and cultural contacts of extreme antiquity. Inscriptions in Phoenician, Aramaic, Minoan, Greek, and unidentified languages are being found with increasing frequency in North and South American jungle or second growth areas. But legends, religious myths, and linguistic curiosities are not enough in themselves to inspire belief in the allegations made in the Casey records, as well as in the tribal traditions, legends, and even the written records of antiquity concerning highly developed scientific knowledge and the existence in archaic times of various modern conveniences concerning travel, communication, and destruction on a cosmic scale. It is precisely in these areas, however, that the unusual discoveries and reevaluation of previously discovered material have been made in the past few years. They concern amazing indications of the advanced knowledge and sophisticated inventions belonging to an era long before what history tells us were the beginning of the first cultures of the Middle East. It is interesting to remember in this regard that the legends of Egypt and Sumeria both referred to a prior greater culture from which they drew their own inspiration and impetus. In some cultures, as in the cases of ancient Egypt, Bolivia, Peru, Central America, Mexico, and India, to mention but a few, civilization remained static or retrogressed instead of sustaining the original impetus. A serious suggestion that extremely ancient cultures on this earth were familiar with, quote, heavier-than-air machines, end quote, is one which normally would be greeted with derision. Nevertheless, an increasing number of artifacts and written references have either been discovered or re-examined in recent years, which indicate an awareness or even familiarity with aircraft and air travel at an era considerably before what we consider the dawn of history. So we do have another overhead sketch here. And I can't really stop this slideshow, but yeah, we'll make it. So, all right. We have this right here. And it is showing with numbered locations all of these different plot points here. But essentially, what we're looking at with all, and I'll read this down here. This is going to be what explains what this is. The Atlantic Ridge showing connections with South America and Africa, interrupted only by the equatorial fracture zone. Oceanic islands associated with the ridge are shown numbered on the legend in the lower right. Some of these islands may have formed considerable land areas when the ocean level was lower, about 12,000 years before the present era, forming at that time the extensive... It's my alarm. Gotta turn that thing off. Sorry about that. Some of these islands may have formed considerable land areas when the ocean level was lower, about 12,000 years before the present era, forming at that time the extensive Atlantic islands described by Plato, including Atlantis. Oceanic deeps are shown as white areas on either side of the range. The 2000 phantom contour line issued here for the continental shelves and intercontinental ridges. Yeah, so again, I'll show it here. And let's see where so the Canaries and the Azores are right here. No, it's really small. I can't blow this up and show you that in full size, but it says the Azores, Madeira, Canaries, Cape Verdes, Lesser Antilles, St. Peter a Paul, Fernando Noronha, Ascension, the Guinea Islands, St. Helena, Trinidad's, Tristan da Cunha. Then we have Go, Bovet, South Georgia Islands, South Sandwich Islands, and the Falklands. Which the Falklands are right where my index finger is. That little black dot with the white ring around it. So how are we all doing out there? We're on page 146 currently. We're going to get into the flying. I guess what you say these are birds from Egypt. Like we're getting into this stuff in the next few pages. With the toy planes that were found in Egypt, that type of stuff. All right, continuing on. Nor are these reports or models to be compared with the picturesque references of ancient mythology, such as Icarus with his feathered wings held together with wax, or the sun chariot of Apollo drawn by 4 fiery steeds. On the contrary, they are concrete references which demonstrate a knowledge of aerodynamics and an awareness of the factors of takeoff, propulsion, braking, and landing. For example, in the antique gold collection of the Republic of Colombia, there exists a golden model of what had long been considered a bird, moth, or flying fish found in a tomb with other buried objects which were estimated as being at least 1,800 years old. This artifact was subsequently examined under magnification by Ivan Sanderson, who suspected that it was not a model of a living organism, but a model of a mechanical object, strongly resembling a plane with delta wings, engine housing, a cockpit, and windshield, all in what would be the correct location in a modern plane, and having also a flanged tail and ailerons, or elevators. This object was checked with several pilots and engineers, including J.A. Ulrich, an experienced pilot with combat service in 2 wars and a professor of aerodynamics. When he was asked what it was, Ulrich, unaware of its provenance or location where it came from, or that it had previously been considered a model of a bird, insect, or fish, stated that it seemed at first to be a model of an F-02 or F-102 fighter plane, and that the fact that the wings curled down at their ends as well as the shape of the plane indicated that it was a jet. He noted that some features, such as the lack of rear elevators, not part of the F-102, were similar to those of the new Sabre aircraft recently developed in Sweden. Part of his opinion is especially interesting in view of Casey's mention of vehicles which could fly through the air and under the sea, as well as reports from the Bermuda Triangle area concerning UFOs sometimes entering and leaving the water at great speeds. In Ulrich's words, quote, "The configuration is only valid for certain types of flight. High nose altitude. The type of wing is suitable for atmosphere up to 50 to 60,000 feet. The sweep is to prevent vibrations when passing the sound barrier. The wing structure indicates supersonic abilities. When you fly at super speed, you build up a cushion. It would also be able to fly underwater and not tear off the wings. In order to move a craft at high speed through such a medium, it would be constructed like this." End quote. But this plane, if such it is not a unique archaeological freak. Other examples, some with two sets of wings, kind of like the Red Baron, although I think that's triple sets of wings, have since been found in different pre-Columbian tombs. One can only guess what other curious models of mechanical developments from prehistoric eras, perhaps not even recognized as such by their later users, were lost when the Spanish invaders melted down all the gold artifacts they could locate to make them into bars for easier distribution among the conquerors. Pictorial representations of what appear to be aircraft or rockets have increasingly been identified or recognized in the art of the ancient cultures of the Americas. As most of the written or pictorial records of the civilized nations were destroyed by the Spaniards, these references have been preserved in other ways, sometimes etched on rock, painted on a vase, carved in stone, or woven in cloth used for mummy wrappings. There is an especially striking example in a half-reclining Maya figure carved in stone on the lid of a sarcophagus found deep within a pyramid in Palenque, Mexico. It is not known what the detailed carving represents. One Maya authority says the bottom is an earth monster on which a figure is resting, while the whole seems to be topped by a tree. The whole, W-H-O-L-E. The Russian scientific writer Alexander Kazanstev has suggested a more revolutionary explanation. He believes that the reclining figure is enclosed within a stylized space vehicle, comparable in construction and design to the rockets of today. Even the position of the figure of the man or pilot is indicative of the position in which our astronauts are placed within the rocket, and all features from the antenna through the flight direction system, turbo compressor, control panel, fuel tanks, combustion chamber, turbine, and exhaust are recognizable, although modified for aesthetic effect. One has the feeling that these representations of aircraft and rockets are reminders or memories of an era of higher civilization when such craft would be drawn exactly rather than stylistically. You guys want to check out what that image looks like from Mexico? Because I do. I want to check that out. So Palenque, Mexico. And how would you even search this up? What would you say? Let's call it rocket. Rocket ancient. Yeah, because I want to be able to look at what we're seeing here. Okay. So I'm about to share my screen here. Just give me a second. So here we go. This is what we're looking at. This is what we were just reading about. And it's apparently dated 400 to 600 AD. And this is actually probably what we're talking about because it covered a sarcophagus of a mummy here. In August of 1973, the astronauts of Skylab 2, while in their space orbit, received a most unusual assignment. They were to photograph, if possible, the Nazca Lines, a series of mysterious artificial lines in the Nazca Valley of Peru, to see whether they were visible from space. These enormous ground markings form a series of straight lines and geometric figures, huge drawings of animals visible only from the air, as well as what clearly seemed to be several landing strips for aircraft. They were incised into the ground, or chipped into the rocky floor of the valley at an unknown time in the past. There were no local legends about them, and since they were not noticeable at ground level, they were discovered only from the air during a search for water resources in the Andes. The lines and gigantic drawings fill a large part of the Nazca Valley, 60 miles long and 10 miles deep. Sometimes they appear in front of small mountains and come out absolutely straight on the other side. Sometimes designs, as in the case of the presumed landing fields, are extremely wide, and sometimes they form huge, artistically sophisticated pictures of animals, fish, and birds, and even an enormous spider. While theories of their origin are many, the only self-evident one is that they were made by people who possessed highly developed instruments for reckoning, and that they were made to be seen from the sky, as this is the only way that one can follow their form. On the Bay of Pisco, on the Peruvian coast, there is a high rock wall on which is incised an enormous trident, or candelabrum, according to the interpretation of the viewer, which, unlike the Nazca Lines, which are over 800 feet long, was easily seen from the sea by the invading... Or hold on a second. This trident or candelabrum is over 800 feet long, so it's unlike the Nazca Lines. It was easily seen from the sea by invading Spaniards, who interpreted it as a sign of the Trinity to encourage them to the conquest and conversion of the heathens. Whatever its purpose was, it is more noticeable from the air than from the sea, and the central tine of the trident points directly to the Nazca Valley, as if it were a direction indicator to the so-called landing fields, perhaps themselves bases for the planes whose golden models were so perplexing. Other geometric lines and enormous figures apparently designed to be seen from the air exist in other parts of the Americas in varied locations, such as huge humanoid figures in the Tarapaca Desert in Chile, the Navajo Maze in California, the Elephant and Serpent Mounds of Wisconsin. Do you know about those? As well as others in different parts of the world, often with no previous archaeological history. The great storehouse of archaeology, Pharaoh's Egypt, has only recently revealed some surprising indications of the principles of heavier-than-air flight in antiquity. Unlike the golden airplanes of Columbia, these are made of wood, found in tombs where they were preserved from decay for thousands of years by the dry climate of Egypt. What appear to be models of glider planes have been found in museum collections where they had previously been considered to be models of birds discovered in ancient tombs. A wooden model now in the Egyptian Museum of Antiquities, identified and studied by Dr. Khalil Messiah, Messiha, in 1969, far from being a bird, possesses the same characteristics as monoplane aircraft models today. The rudder or tail is upright and the body has an aerofoil section. In commenting on the dihedral angles noticeable on either side, Dr. Messiah's brother G. Messiah, a flight engineer, has observed, quote, "The negative dihedral angle fulfills the same requirements as the positive. A section shows that the surface of the wing is part of an ellipse which provides stability in flight, and the aerofoil shapes of the body lessens the drag, a fact which was discovered after years of experimental work in aeronautics." End quote. The airplane, after thousands of years, is still capable of flight, and when thrown from the hand like a model glider, performs admirably, demonstrating the knowledge of aerodynamics on the part of its ancient makers. Since Dr. Messiah first realized that the wing spreads of some of the bird models were almost identical to the wing spread of the new Caravelle aircraft, other potential planes or gliders were identified, and in 1972 an exhibition of 14 such models was opened at the Cairo Museum of Antiquities as a proof of the knowledge of flight in ancient Egypt. We do not know whether these artifacts were invented or inherited from an older culture. However, as most Egyptian tomb models are linked to larger originals, it is impossible that under the desert sands an original glider or aircraft may await the excavator. And this really troubles me too for the current world. We have so much fiction and memorabilia of fiction that when we go, like thousands of years from now, like, who's to say that this thing isn't going to be considered some marvel of technology and that it did in fact travel through time, when we today know this is a fictional car from a fictional movie? It's going to get real messy with the historians, I think, because how are we supposed to know what's what? There's going to have to be a lot of discernment put into things to really make sure that we're not falsely adding to history. Like, imagine someone digging up a landfill and finding a whole bunch of Marvel stuff of all the superheroes. And then they try to say those were like our ancient gods and they were super powerful and stuff. I hope that's not the case, but it sure seems like that might end up happening. Just because of the amount of consumer goods that we have that represent these fictional characters in fictional stories in movies. I really think it's going to be hard for our future generations to really discern between them, especially if we lose electricity again. And we have to start from scratch. Then just a few like 3 generations removed. How are they going to tell the difference between movies in real life? Like, they're going to say that this is just something that people found. Like, it's just like found footage, documentary type of stuff, not fiction anymore. They're going to say the stuff that is fiction today is fact tomorrow. And I hope that doesn't ever happen. But it probably already has happened with our ancient past, especially since we don't know what happened to any of these civilizations that are underwater now. The most complete of the ancient written records concerning aircraft are perhaps those of the Mahabharata, the Hindu epic that, although considered to have been written down in its present form in 1500 BC, was apparently copied and recopied from remote antiquity. The epic deals with the actions of the gods and of the ancient peoples in India, but contains contains such a wealth of detail of a scientific nature that when it was first translated in the middle of the 19th century, references to aircraft and rocket propulsions made no sense to the translators, since the mechanisms described thousands of years in the past were not to make their appearance in modern times until more than half a century later. Many of the verses in the Mahabharata devoted to flying machines called Vimanas contained, to the mystification of the translators, detailed information on the principles of their construction. In other ancient Indian texts, the Samarangana Sutradhara, the advantages and disadvantages of different types of aircraft are discussed at length as to their relative capabilities of ascent, cruising speed, and descent, and even a description of the fuel power source, Mercury, and recommendations regarding types of wood and light, heat-absorbing metals suitable for aircraft construction. Mercury is banned. It's illegal to have in large quantities. And I wonder if it's because it's the most efficient fuel source. Makes you wonder. In addition, there are informative details on how to take pictures of enemy planes, methods of determining their approach patterns, means of rendering their pilots unconscious, and finally, how to destroy enemy Vimanas. Incredible. In another ancient classic of India, the Ramayana, there exist curious descriptions of travel by aircraft thousands of years ago. Details of the view over Ceylon, Ceylon, and parts of the Indian coast are written so naturally and are so similar to what one now sees: the breakers on the shore, the curve of the land, the rising of the hills, the aspect of towns and forests, that one is almost convinced that some air travelers of ancient times actually saw the earth from the sky rather than imagined it. In a contemporary abstract of the Ramayana, the Mahavira Charita, a god hero Rama, on his return from Lanka, where he has just rescued his wife Sita, is presented with a special Vimana, or aircraft, described as, quote, unimpeded in its motion, of coveted speed, under complete control, whose action is ever obedient to the will of him who flies it, furnished with window apartments and excellent seats, end quote. So this also begs the question of, were these craft controlled by thought? And maybe we're onto something with that too. An instance where an ancient classic reads like a modern advertisement for Air India. In the same text, we find an exchange of dialogue which is especially startling when we remember that it preceded the actuality of space travel, as well as a realization of how things looked in space by several thousand years. Rama. The motion of this most excellent of chariots seems changed. Vishishara. This chariot is now abandoning its proximity to the middle world. Sita. How is it that even in daytime there appears this circle of stars? And Rama. Queen. It is indeed a circle of stars, but owing to the great distance we cannot perceive it in the daytime, as our own eyes are dimmed by the rays of the sun. Now that is removed by the ascent of this chariot, and thus we can see the stars. So before continuing on with the India portion of this reading, there is another etch showing these ancient Egyptian glider planes that were found in a tomb. It says originally thought to be a model of a bird, as compared with an ancient model of a hawk. The plane on the left suggests a knowledge on the part of the makers of the principles of aerodynamics, demonstrating camber the angle of wing sweep back from the fuselage, and the dihedral angle, the angle of lift or depression in regard to the fuselage. The tail of the plane is vertical, a feature never seen in birds. The wings of the glider are formed to create a vacuum for lift above the wing. Although they have principles of flight in common, birds with movable feathered wings and tails are built differently from planes, and the construction of the glider is ample proof that it is not a model of a bird, but a model of a heavier-than-air machine. In addition, it flies a considerable distance when thrown from one's hand. So the larger of the two, this was the one that was found in these ancient tombs. And this is a model of a regular organic bird and how that would look like. And they were saying the tails on this, like it would never be naturally occurring in nature with a bird. And also the wings, the arch on the top, and it's one wing on the top. And then the fact that it flies near perfect. It's a real good feat of accomplishment. All right, we'll get through 2 or 3 more pages, and we will finish this chapter next week, but I do want to get to this last part of a wall carving in Dendera, Egypt, and the possibility of electric light bulbs. So, all right, we're almost there. Whether these accounts are memories of a very ancient technically advanced civilization, or whether they are simply fantasies comparable to some of the imaginings of present-day science fiction writers, some of these accounts from the distant past sound strangely contemporary. I always have trouble with this word. Contemporaneous, except for the material used as the source of power for the aircraft, which may, of course, be mistranslated from the original. Quote, inside it, one must place the Mercury engine with its iron heating apparatus beneath. By means of the power latent in the Mercury, which sets the driving whirlwind in motion, a man sitting inside may travel a far distance in the sky. 4 Mercury containers must be built into the interior structure. When these have been heated by controlled fire, the Vimana develops thunder power through the Mercury. If this iron engine with properly welded joints be filled with mercury and the fire be conducted to the upper part, it develops power with the roar of a lion, and at once it becomes like a pearl in the sky. But models and so that's the end of that quote. But models and pictures of aircraft and accounts of rockets and space flights are only an indication, not a proof, of high scientific advancement. However, certain techniques and artifacts, some recognized many years after their discovery for what they really were, furnish a more tangible proof of a previously unsuspected technological capability of the distant past. A good example is that of the Antikythera, quote, star computer, end quote, a small bronze object consisting of plates and wheels or dials fused together by the sea. Do any of you recognize what that is? I think I have an idea. Picked up along with other objects, mostly statues, from an ancient wreck on the floor of the Aegean Sea over 70 years ago. So this thing was picked up like around the 1900s. Subjected to detailed examination in acid baths almost 60 years later and through the studies of several archaeologists, including Derek de Sola Price and George Stammers, it turned out to be a geared star finder and computer of planetary orbits, a mechanism for checking position at night, indicating unsuspected navigational and astronomical knowledge in ancient times. In the words of Dr. Price, quote, nothing like this instrument is preserved elsewhere. Finding a thing like this is like finding a jet plane in the tomb of King Tut, end quote. An eventuality perhaps not completely outside the bounds of possibility in the light of recent findings. So I want to also show you that star computer. And I'm pretty sure what I'm thinking of is what it is. But I just want to confirm this. So if you just give me a moment, I will pull this up. Yeah, I'm also getting ready to do the Great Lakes Triangle series. I was planning on starting it tomorrow. I guess it'll just depend on how I'm feeling. So I know some of you should recognize this. But this was determined to be an ancient astral computer. And this thing still fascinates me. The wheel. All right. Other concrete proofs of technical advancement may still lie within museums classified as religious objects. Children's toys are simply labeled unclassified. Wilhelm Koenig, a German archaeologist digging at a 2,000-year-old site near Baghdad in Iraq shortly before World War II, unearthed some curious artifacts consisting of cylinders lined with asphalt, contained within jars and provided with an iron plug. In other words, dry cell batteries without the electrolyte, which had, whatever it was, evaporated. Examples of these batteries later functioned perfectly when a new electrolyte copper sulfate was added. After his initial find, Koenig identified parts of other batteries already on display in museums and labeled as of unknown use. Since these batteries were excavated and identified, many other ancient examples have been found in Iraq and other parts of the Middle East. They were apparently used for electroplating metals, but one wonders if this extremely ancient knowledge of electricity, perhaps inherited from an early culture but forgotten until it was rediscovered in the 18th century, was used in ancient times for purposes other than electroplating. The Greek and Roman world used torches and oil lamps for illumination, and wherever passageways are still standing between ancient buildings, traces of smoke can be found on the ceilings. But, in the case of the more remote Egyptian civilization, subterranean tunnels, beautifully carved and painted, show no traces of torches or oil lamps on the ceilings. Nor do the walls and ceilings of certain caves in Western Europe, where the remarkably sophisticated Magdalenian and Eurygnician cave painters executed their masterpieces 12,000 to 30,000 years ago. An ancient Egyptian wall carving at the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, Egypt, long considered to be rather an archaeological puzzle, depicts a scene where attendants seem to be carrying giant light bulbs with interior filaments in the shape of thin snakes, connected to a box or switch with braided cables, and which strongly suggests powerful electric lamps supported by high-tension insulators. Regarding the cables, Dr. John Harris of Oxford has observed, quote, "The cables are virtually an exact copy of engineering illustrations as currently used. The cable is shown as very heavy and striated, indicating a bundle of many multi-purpose conductors rather than a single high-voltage cable." So I'm about to show you this representation of what was on the wall in Egypt there. It says wall carving from the Temple of Hathor in Dendera, Egypt, thousands of years old, showing what were formerly described as ritual objects, but to a modern eye strongly resemble powerful light bulbs with braided cables attached to what may be a switch or generator. Evidence of knowledge of electricity has been found in different areas of Egypt and ancient Middle East, together with indications of its use in electroplating and possibly also for illumination. So I will show that right now. Let me just make this screen a little bigger. And you see the smaller people on the bottom? Just fascinating stuff. If any of you out there have a better explanation, let me know. Just incredible. All right. So we're on page 154. We're going to read 2 more paragraphs, we're going to call it, for today, and we'll finish chapter 8 next week. There exist other illustrations in papyrus and in carvings preserved for thousands of years by the dry climate of Egypt, which, when looked at with a fresh and unbiased approach, seem quite evidently to depict ancient use of modern devices. One remembers that in the ancient records there is a reference to the reign of the gods before the first dynasty, a time of superior civilization and miraculous powers, shared in memory and records by the most ancient world cultures. It is surprising to realize that ancient cultures considerably antedating Greece and Rome possessed knowledge of astronomy, advanced mathematics, and calculation of time, and measures of the Earth and solar system thousands of years before these same facts were rediscovered or reestablished in modern times. To have come by this information, the ancient culture or cultures would have had telescopes or other instruments sufficiently precise as to make the exact calculations. And with that, today's deep dive is now complete. So we have the rest of chapter 8 to do. There's about 20 pages left of chapter 8 here. So I do have a few other books that I am looking at for going on further after this book. There are a lot of options. There's a good amount. There's more than one. But one of them is a 2-part book, and then there's another author that has quite an in-depth series on the Bermuda Triangle, but I'll see what the best recommended ones are here. I need to do a little more research, but I am enjoying this Charles Berlitz book. So, again, thank you all for being here. Next week, we will continue this series, and I hope you all have a good rest of your evening. On Saturday, we will be having the Chicago Film Industry Deep Dive. Sunday is our general live stream chill talk. So that'll be it for today. And I hope you all enjoyed it. Let me know in the comments if you have any suggestions on what I could improve. And yeah, until the next one. Class dismissed.